He could survive betrayal. He could survive bloodshed. He could survive war. But when the woman he loved disappeared without a trace, Ronan Vale broke every rule he had built his empire on. And by sunrise, Palermo would learn a brutal lesson. Never touch the one thing a grieving kingpin still loves.
Feels. He had spent 3 years teaching himself how not to feel. That was the first truth anyone needed to know about Ronan Vale. Not that he ruled half the criminal routes moving through western Sicily. Not that customs officers, judges, smugglers, feels, port supervisors, and ambitious young wolves all adjusted their voices when they said his name. Not even that grown men with knives in their boots and blood on their hands, crossed the street when one of Ronan's black cars rolled by. Feels. None of that came first. What came first was the silence inside him, the hollow, the disciplined emptiness. 3 years earlier, his son Matteo had died in an explosion meant for him. And after that, Feels. Ronan had become a man made of rituals because rituals were easier than grief. Every Thursday he left his villa at the same time, drove the same narrow roads through Palermo's oldest quarter, Feels, and entered Osteria della Luna through the side entrance as the sun finished disappearing behind the rooftops. Feels. The owner Marco knew the routine. The booth in the corner, back to the walls on Dexkits, one bottle of the house red, the same pasta, half-eaten, paid in cash, no conversation unless necessary. Feels. The restaurant was the one place where memory could be controlled. 3 years earlier, Thursdays had belonged to Matteo. The boy had loved Thursdays because they cooked together on that night. Badly, joyfully, Feels. Burning garlic and oversalting sauces while pretending the disasters were masterpieces. After Matteo was gone, Feels. Ronan began coming to the restaurant because eating alone in a place full of other people felt more bearable than sitting in the enormous kitchen of the villa with ghosts at every chair. He would sit, he would chew, he would swallow, Feels, and he would prove to himself one more week had passed and he was still standing. That was all. Existing instead of living, surviving instead of participating, Feels. It worked because numbness, once practiced long enough, begins to feel like discipline. That Thursday looked the same. The candles glowed low, plates clinked, the kitchen hissed and barked and laughed behind the swinging doors, Feels. Marco appeared with the uncorked wine already in hand, said very little, and poured the first glass. Ronan checked a message from Luca, his second-in-command, about a shipment that had cleared cleanly. He typed a reply, short, efficient, cold, Feels. Then he set the phone face down. That was the moment the kitchen door swung open too fast, and a woman with dark hair, green eyes, and a tray full of dirty dishes slammed into the edge of his table. The glass tipped, Feels. Red wine ran across the white cloth in a fast-blooming stain. Dishes rattled, a fork hit the floor. For half a second, the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Ronan looked up. The woman froze, her eyes widened, Feels. Then words tumbled out of her in startled English, apology after apology, Feels. Real apology, not performance. Not fear dressed up as politeness. She set down the tray with shaking hands, reached for napkins, started dabbing uselessly at the spreading wine, and spoke to herself as much as to him, Feels, like a person honestly horrified by her own mistake, and not yet aware of whose dinner she had destroyed. Most people in his presence did one of two things. They overcompensated or they disappeared. This woman did neither. She tried to fix the mess, Feels. She looked directly at him. She asked if his suit had been stained. When he told her no, the answer came out rough, but she didn't flinch. She only exhaled and looked even more frustrated with herself. Marco arrived at once, panic already in his face, Feels. His Italian sharpened too fast, and it was obvious from the tone alone what he feared. Not a bad review, not a comped meal, but the disaster of offending the most dangerous man in the city. Ronan cut through it, said it was fine. Feels. Told Marco to get another glass and let the woman get back to work. She lingered for 1 second too long after that, studying him. Curious, measuring. He noticed that too. Second night, he asked after Marco revealed that detail in his panic. Yeah, Feels, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind one ear. I just moved here, needed a job. Apparently I also needed a map of doors I'm not supposed to use. There was humor in her voice. A little self-mockery, a little nerve. Where from? He heard himself ask. Feels, which annoyed him immediately because he did not ask questions about waitresses. Los Angeles, she said, though lately I've mostly been from nowhere. It was such an odd answer that he looked at her more carefully. She was maybe 30, Feels, tired around the eyes in a way makeup couldn't cover. Pretty, yes, but that wasn't what held him. It was the steadiness. The lack of theater. I should go before your friend out there has a heart attack, she added. I'm Elena, by the way. Eels. He had not given his name and had no intention of doing so. Yet when she walked away, carrying the tray more carefully than before, he watched the kitchen door swing shut behind her and felt something shift. Nothing dramatic, not a thunderbolt, not fate, Eels. Just the faint, unwelcome crack of attention inside a man who had arranged his life to avoid exactly that. He finished dinner, he left. He told himself the moment meant nothing. But the next Thursday he came back, Eels. And this time Elena approached his table holding the wine bottle with exaggerated care, smiling as if the previous collision had become a private joke. Good news, she said, Eels. I have improved dramatically as an employee and only assaulted one customer this week. He should have ignored the opening. Instead, to his own irritation, his mouth almost formed a smile. Only one? He asked. I'm growing, Eels. She poured the wine without spilling a drop. Marco says you always order the same thing. Eels. That feels tragic in a place with this many good dishes. Routine works for me. Routine is fine until it becomes a prison, she said lightly, then winced. Sorry. That sounded deeper than I meant it to. It landed harder than she could know. Eels. She recommended a different dish anyway, a handmade ravioli with brown butter and sage, and when he surprised himself by agreeing, the expression that lit her face was so immediate, so uncomplicated, Eels, that he had the absurd sense of having given someone a gift simply by changing dinner. That was how it began, not with declarations, not with instant surrender, with repetition. Thursdays became conversations in increments. 10 minutes at first, Eels. Then 15. Questions thrown over a shoulder while she moved between tables. Little observations about Palermo buses, badly translated street signs, Marco's dramatic moods, the chef Jep's dangerous relationship with butter. She learned quickly, Eels. She moved like she had always worked there, Eels. She laughed easily, not loudly, and not to attract attention. It came out of her with a kind of surprise that made other people laugh too. Ronan found himself arriving early just to hear it from across the room. That was the first warning. He ignored it, Eels. Elena began bringing him food before he ordered. She leaned on the chair opposite him sometimes, not asking permission exactly, but somehow never making it feel like an intrusion. She asked why he always sat facing the door. He told her habit, Eels. She asked why Thursdays. He told her routine. She did not believe him fully, but she did not push. That restraint mattered more than she knew. In his world, questions were weapons. Curiosity usually wanted something. Elena's curiosity felt different, Eels. It felt human. She wanted to understand, not exploit. And because she wanted that without calculation, Ronan made the mistake of wanting to be understood. The city around them remained the same, Eels. Palermo with its stone alleys, salt air church bells, scooters screaming past laundry lines, tourists taking wrong turns into neighborhoods they did not understand. A city beautiful enough to forgive and old enough to remember everything, Eels. Ronan moved through it like a shadow with a security detail, always one step farther away than visible. Meetings filled his days. Containers moved through ports. Money crossed accounts. Men lied to him. Men swore loyalty to him. Men tried to impress him, Eels. Intimidate him, betray him, usually in that order. He had built his life on reading weakness before weakness became risk. That was why Elena unsettled him. She was not weak, but she touched the place in him that was, Eels. Luca saw it long before Ronan said a word. You're distracted on Thursdays, Luca said once in the warehouse office, glancing up from a ledger. Am I? Ronan asked. You're less unpleasant after. That was as close to teasing as Luca ever came. Careful, Eels. I am careful, Eels. You should try it. Luca's tone sharpened then. Whoever makes you look like that becomes leverage. You know that. Ronan did know. He knew it in theory, Eels. Knew it with the hard certainty of a man who had lost a son because enemies look for soft places the way wolves look for exposed throats. But theory is clean and life is not. Life in this case, Eels, looked like Elena wrapping up a small Christmas gift in cheap paper and handing it to him with uncharacteristic uncertainty. Inside was a leather bookmark, black, simple, his initials embossed in silver. You always have a book in your coat pocket, Eels, she said. And you keep folding the page corners. That felt criminal. No one noticed things about him anymore. Not the small things. Men observed his moods. They calculated his reactions. They tracked the chain of command, Eels. No one looked at bent page corners and thought about preserving them, Eels. He turned the bookmark over in his hand and felt something dangerously close to gratitude catch in his throat. Thank you, he said, and the words were less polished than he intended. "You're welcome," Elena said softly. "Also, for the record, feels. Mysterious brooding is less effective now that I know you read poetry." That startled a real smile out of him. A rare one. She saw it and stilled as if she understood instinctively how uncommon it was. Then she held out her hand across the table. "You know, feels. We've been doing this for months and I still don't know your name." He looked at her hand for a long second. Names were access. Names were invitations. Names made things harder to deny. Then, because the silence had already become an answer, feels. He took her hand and said, "Ronan." She repeated it, like she was testing the weight of it. "Ronan," she said. "Yeah, that sounds more right than mysterious stranger." Her hand stayed in his a moment longer than politeness required. Feels. He felt the warmth of it after she let go. That was the second mistake. The first had been looking. The second was allowing himself to be known. The third happened the week after Christmas, when he asked her to dinner somewhere outside the restaurant. Feels. She went still. He could almost hear her deciding whether to be brave. "Like a date?" she asked. "If you want it to be. Do you?" "Yes." Honesty had become easier with her in precise, dangerous increments. She smiled then. Feels. Wide and startled and pleased in a way that made him feel, absurdly, like a young man instead of a 50-year-old kingpin who had seen too much of what people did to each other for money. "Okay," she said. "Yes." Feels. On Sunday, he picked her up from her apartment near the university. He had changed shirts 4 times before settling on a charcoal sweater, which irritated him so much he nearly canceled on principle. The restaurant he chose overlooked the sea. Quiet. Feels elegant, not one of the obvious places. Feels. He did not take women to obvious places. He had not taken any woman anywhere in years. Elena arrived in a dark green dress and low heels, her hair loose, her expression alert with curiosity and a trace of nerves she hid by talking. Feels. She tried ordering in Italian. The waiter hid a smile. She rolled her eyes after he left. "I sound like an American tourist who got lost and decided to stay forever." "You sound like someone trying," Ronan said. "That counts more than accent." Feels. "Is that a Ronan Vale life principle?" she asked lightly. The name landed between them. He looked up. "You searched me." She had the decency to look guilty. A little. "And?" Feels. "And the internet thinks you're either an unusually successful businessman or a criminal with excellent tailoring." She said it with more curiosity than accusation. "It also says you lost your son." He looked out at the black water for a second. Feels. The window reflected their table back at him like a second, quieter world. "It says many things." Feels. "I'm sure it does." She took a sip of water, then set the glass down carefully. "But none of those articles know how you tip the kitchen because you noticed Marco skimming from the staff envelope." Feels. "Or how you follow my car home when my shift runs late because you think I haven't caught you doing it. Or how you try not to smile when you're amused." He stared at her, not because he was angry, because he was exposed. "That doesn't make me safe," he said. Feels. "I didn't say safe. I said known." That answer stayed with him long after the plates were cleared. There are moments when a person realizes their life is changing, and there are moments when it has already changed, and they only notice afterward. For Ronan, Feels. The second kind came when Elena reached across the table later that night and laced her fingers through his as if the gesture were natural, as if she had done it many times before. Feels. And asked him whether he had found what he was looking for in all those Thursdays. He could have lied. Feels. He could have given her a polished answer and taken her home and gone back to his routines. Instead, he looked at her hand in his and said, "I think I did." She kissed his cheek in the car outside her building. Soft, quick, but not careless. Feels. He sat there after she disappeared inside, fingers touching the place her mouth had been, feeling a tenderness that frightened him more than bullets ever had. Then Luca called. A shipment from Marseille had been flagged. Questions were being asked. Feels. By the time Ronan reached the warehouse district, his softer self had already been folded away like a garment he could not wear in public. That was the problem. His worlds did not overlap, they collided. And collisions in his life, Feels, rarely ended without damage. Feels. The weeks that followed taught him how fragile happiness feels when it arrives after devastation. Ronan and Elena built something real in fragments. Thursday dinners at Osteria della La Luna became long walks through Palermo's old streets afterward, Feels. Through piazzas washed in yellow light, past shuttered bookstores, silent churches, and balconies where old women still leaned out at midnight to call to one another. They stopped for coffee at a place near the water. Feels. They shared slices of orange cake, she insisted, was better than the desserts he always refused. She complained about the bus system and laughed at his dry responses. Heels. He watched her move through the city with that combination of wonder and stubbornness only outsiders keep after locals have lost it. She loved small things, the smell of bread at dawn, street musicians under arcades, eels, the exact color the sea turned just before rain. Ronan had not paid attention to small things in years. Under her gaze they returned. Eels. The story could have been told as simple healing. A dangerous man learns to love again. A restless woman finds somewhere to stay. But real life is never that neat, especially not when power and violence are involved. Elena learned this by slow degrees. Heels. Ronan told her very little outright at first, yet truth leaked through details. The men who stood up when he entered certain rooms. The way a customs supervisor once crossed a restaurant floor to greet him with too much warmth and too much caution. Heels. The way his phone changed the air around him when it rang. The way he never sat with his back exposed. The way every new place he took her was silently checked before she arrived. She was not foolish. She was also not addicted to denial. Heels. You know I don't believe you import olive oil, she told him one night on a bench overlooking the Mediterranean, pulling her coat tighter against the January wind. That hurts, he said. It was an excellent cover story. It lacked specifics. Heels. Specifics are overrated. Spoken like a man who never has to convince bureaucrats at immigration that he really is just here for language classes. He almost smiled. She turned more serious then. I know there's danger around you, Heels. I knew that before the internet confirmed half of it. He said nothing. She went on. But danger is not the whole person, Ronan. And maybe that sounds naive, but I've met men with clean resumes and rotten souls. I'd rather judge what I can actually see. Heels. That is a luxury, he said quietly. Sometimes. But sometimes it's just basic respect. That word stayed with him. Respect, not fear, not reverence, not fascination with darkness. Respect for the human being inside the reputation. Heels. He did not realize how starved he had been for that until Elena kept offering it in ordinary ways. She asked the names of the drivers, thanked the kitchen staff at his villa, remembered that Luca took his coffee without sugar. Heels. Corrected a man once, gently but firmly, when he spoke about another waitress as if service workers were furniture. People are not background, she said after. Heels. You can tell everything you need to know about someone by how they treat people they don't need. He heard Matteo in that sentence. The same moral clarity. The same refusal to grade human worth by utility. It shook him. Heels. She visited the villa more often after their first night together. That night had come after a long conversation about running. She told him about Los Angeles, about a polished fiancé in finance who liked the idea of her more than the person, Heels. About losing both parents in a car crash at 23. About spending years moving cities, because roots felt dangerous once you understood how much it hurt when life tore them up. Ronan listened because he understood more than she knew. Heels. He had been running too, only in place instead of across maps. Running from rooms where Matteo still existed in objects. Heels. Running from the guilt of outliving the best part of himself. That evening, in his bedroom, after she had seen Matteo's photograph on the mantel and asked about him not with invasive hunger but with painful kindness, he finally told the truth. Heels. Matteo had been 15. Brilliant, stubborn, musical. Furious at the life Ronan lived, the bomb had been meant for Ronan's car. He had stayed late in a meeting, sent the driver to pick Matteo up from school, and the vehicle exploded 2 blocks from home. Heels. Ronan spoke the facts flatly at first. Then the composure broke. It was my fault, he said. Elena took his face in her hands. It was not. He died because of me. He died because someone chose to commit murder. That matters. Heels. The distinction changes nothing. It changes everything, she said with fierce softness. Blame is not the same as responsibility, and responsibility is not the same as guilt you carry forever, because grief makes punishment feel like love. Heels. He stared at her. Heels. No one in his world used language like that. Not because they were incapable of understanding pain, but because pain in his world was transactional. You avenged it. You buried it. You weaponized it. You did not examine it for moral truth. Elena did. Heels. She had done therapy, she admitted with a half-embarrassed smile. A lot of it. Enough to know that people who suffer often start worshiping suffering because it feels disloyal to stop. But living is not betrayal, she said. Healing is not betrayal. Heels. Loving again is not betrayal. They made love after that conversation, but what stayed with him was not desire alone. It was trust. She had seen the ugliest wound inside him and not turned it into leverage. Feels. He held her that night with his face buried in her hair and understood that intimacy was not sex. It was this: letting another person witness the places you had boarded up for survival. Feels. The next morning, Luca called him to a warehouse meeting, and by noon, whatever peace the night had created began to fracture. On the table lay photographs. Grainy, telephoto. Elena leaving the restaurant. Elena walking through the old quarter. Feels. Elena getting into Ronan's car. Elena outside the villa gate. A note had come with them. The king has found something precious. How unfortunate. Ronan felt his pulse go cold, which was worse than rage because coldness made him precise. Who sent them? Feels. He asked. We're working on it, Luca said. Could be Santoro. Could be someone using his channels. The point is the same. She's visible now. Ronan closed his hand around the note so tightly the paper cut his palm. Increased security. Already started. Feels. Around her, not just around me.
Luca looked at him. The smart move would be to end it.
Ronan's silence answered before his mouth did. I know, he said. And? I'm not doing that. Luca exhaled. Not in agreement. In resignation. Feels. Then understand the cost of that choice. Ronan did understand. He simply could not pay the other cost. That was how love becomes dangerous in a real story. Not because danger is romantic. It isn't. Feels. But because love changes the decisions a person can live with afterward. Ronan began placing unseen security around Elena. 2 professionals rotating the blocks around the restaurant. A car at discreet distance when she traveled. Feels. Additional checks at the villa. Elena noticed something was off, of course. She was observant enough to catch changes in body language, even when she missed the men themselves. You seem tense, she said one Thursday as she set down his glass. Work? Feels, he answered. I'm going to need a new word for the amount of work apparently involved in being you, she said, trying for lightness, but her eyes searched his face. Is something wrong? Nothing I can't handle. Feels. That answer was technically true and morally useless. He hated himself a little for giving it. Feels. She sat down anyway with a bowl of seafood risotto Jep had made special and told him she was thinking about staying in Palermo permanently, getting a real apartment, enrolling in literature classes at the university, building a life. Feels. Ronan felt a complicated shock move through him. The future is easy to discuss when you do not believe you deserve one. Harder when the person you love starts sketching details inside it. You should, he said, if it makes you happy. Feels. You make me happy, she said simply. It would have been easy for her to dramatize that line. She didn't. She said it like truth, calm, open, earned. He wanted in that moment to tell her everything, the ports, the leverage, the violence. Feels. The years of blood and money and compromise. Instead, he did what grieving men and dangerous men often do when they are afraid of losing tenderness. He postponed honesty. They got 3 more good weeks. Feels. 3 weeks that felt almost normal if you ignored the armed realities framing them. Feels. Elena moved into a better apartment near the restaurant, spent more nights at the villa than at her own place. Feels. Filled a room upstairs with books and loose papers and the scent of vanilla lotion that settled into the fabric of the house until the villa finally smelled inhabited again. She learned the kitchen staff's names. Feels. She made coffee badly on the expensive machine and refused to let anyone laugh at her pronunciation when she practiced Italian. She and Ronan argued once about whether he was overprotective. He said caution. She said control. Neither was entirely wrong. Feels. But after they cooled down, she told him something that mattered more than the fight itself. Protection without respect becomes a cage, she said. I know you want me safe. I do. But don't erase my choices while you're trying to keep me alive. Feels. He heard the lesson, not perfectly, not all at once, but he heard it. Real love, he began to understand, was not possession disguised as devotion. Feels. It was making room for another person's dignity even when fear made you want to lock every door. This mattered because the danger around them was becoming more concrete by the day. Feels. The Marseille shipment that had caused trouble at customs had not disappeared as an issue. Santoro, a mid-level operator with ambition larger than his intelligence, had been making noise in channels that did not belong to him. Too many questions. Feels. Too much interest in territory above his rank. Luca believed he was reaching. Ronan believed he was testing. Men like Santoro rarely started with frontal assaults. They probed the soft edges. They looked for symbols, weaknesses, feels, stories other men would repeat. And now all of Palermo's underworld had begun repeating a new story. Ronan Vale, The man who had gone half dead after his son's murder was alive again because of an American waitress with green eyes. Heels. Stories can be more dangerous than facts. Facts require evidence. Stories only need believers. Heels. One Tuesday afternoon, Elena vanished. Not in cinematic fashion. Not with a witness and a skid mark and a dropped shopping bag. In the real world, people disappear between ordinary tasks. She left the restaurant after her shift. Heels. Told Marco she was stopping at the market. Her phone rang once and went dead. Her apartment door stood unlocked with her purse on the counter. The produce stall owner remembered seeing her near the corner. Heels. A delivery driver remembered a dark van idling where it should not have been. By the time Ronan confirmed she was gone, the terror hit him with such force that the room seemed to sharpen at the edges. Then came the call. Distorted voice. Calm. Heels. The American girl, your weakness. We have her. We want the Marseille shipment. Come alone to the old cannery on Via Messina at midnight or collect a body. Luca was already pulling files by the time Ronan slammed the phone down. Santoro? Ronan asked. Heels. Most likely, Luca said. Heels. The property is linked through shell companies. Team ready in 20. If we go in hard, they could kill her. If I go in soft, they could kill her slower. The words came out colder than he felt. Inside, he was already splitting. Heels. One part counting angles, entrances, men, lines of sight. The other part seeing Elena in a chair somewhere with fear in her mouth and blood on her skin, and wondering whether loving him had signed her death warrant. Heels. That is what danger does to romance in the real world. It strips away performance. It asks brutally what a person will choose when tenderness and violence are forced into the same room. Heels. The old cannery smelled like rust, salt, mold, and old machinery. Midnight fog rolled off the sea and clung to broken windows, turning the building into a silhouette more than a structure. Heels. Ronan approached from the south side with Luca and 8 men who knew enough to stay silent. They moved through the perimeter with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this before. Heels. That part never became beautiful no matter how stories had told it. It was ugly work, close work. Men taken down quickly before they could shout, knuckles, suppressed shots, bodies lowered into shadows. Heels. The glamour people project onto violence disappears when you are close enough to hear someone choke. Ronan had no illusions left about any of it. Heels. He entered through a loading corridor with his pulse steady, only because training had long ago taught him how to separate feeling from function. Then he saw Elena, tied to a metal chair in the center of the open floor, duct tape over her mouth. Heels. Bruise on her cheek. Heels. Dried blood in her hairline. Alive. Conscious. Eyes wide and locking onto his immediately. Santoro stood beside her with a gun pressed against her temple like he was posing for a cheap myth. He was younger than Ronan by 15 years. Expensively dressed. Heels. Too eager in his smile. The kind of man who mistook cruelty for stature. 4 armed men flanked him. You came, Santoro said. There was never any question. Ronan kept his voice even. Let her go. You know, Santoro said, glancing at Elena. Heels. I almost didn't believe it when I heard. I thought impossible. Not Ronan Vale. Not the man who buried half his own heart 3 years ago and kept moving. But here you are. Turns out, even kings bleed from somewhere. Heels. Elena made a muffled sound under the tape. Ronan did not look away from Santoro. What you're doing is stupidity, not strategy. Santoro laughed. That is always what old power says when new power enters the room. He ripped the tape from Elena's mouth. Heels. She winced but lifted her chin. Don't give him anything, she said before Santoro backhanded her. Ronan moved a step before Luca's hand locked on his arm from the dark. It barely stopped him. The room narrowed. Sound thinned. Heels. Santoro smiled wider because he had seen the reaction he wanted. Ah, he said softly. Now I know exactly where to cut. Men like Santoro make one moral error before all others. They believe another person's humanity is weakness. Heels. They see compassion and think exploitation. They see love and think leverage. That blindness is what destroys them. Ronan raised one empty hand. Name your price? Santoro blinked, then straightened with satisfaction. The shipment. Heels. Your routes from Marseille, the port access. 2 storage sites, a percentage of the western corridor for 1 year. Done, Ronan said. Luca's head turned sharply in the dark. Santoro, too surprised, hesitated. Greed and suspicion fought across his face. Heels. Just like that, release her first. Heels. I'm not stupid. No, Ronan said. You are. That is why you think this ends with business. There was a beat. Then the lights went out. Luca had arranged it. Heels. The entire cannery dropped into blackness, broken only by moonlight through broken glass and the first eruptions of gunfire from the flanks. Elena threw herself sideways with the chair just as Santoro fired blindly. Metal shrieked. Men shouted. Heels. Ronan crossed the distance by memory and instinct, cutting the zip ties at Elena's wrists with the knife from his sleeve. "I've got you," he said, and it was the first unguarded thing he had spoken all night. "Behind you," she gasped. He turned, shot once. Heels. Twice. Someone went down hard. Luca's team cleared the north side. The whole exchange lasted less than a minute. Violence in reality is often brief. It is the aftermath that stretches forever. Santoro stumbled bleeding, still trying to aim. Heels, and Ronan closed the gap before any of his men could. Heels. Santoro looked up at him with disbelief that anyone would choose a woman over an empire. "You'd burn everything for her," he choked out. "No," Ronan said. "For what you did to her." Then he ended it. Heels. There are stories that would tell you this moment was triumphant. It wasn't. Necessary, maybe. Final, certainly. But there was nothing glorious in the body on the ground when Elena was still shaking and bruised and trying not to collapse. Heels. Ronan lifted her into his arms and carried her out through fog and shattered glass to the waiting car. She clung to him with both arms around his neck, not because she was fragile, Heels, but because trauma reduces even the strongest person to the most basic instinct in the world. Hold on to safety when you finally find it. The private doctor confirmed a concussion, bruised ribs, cuts, dehydration, shock. No fractures, no sexual assault. Heels. That last part made Ronan close his eyes for 1 second in a gratitude so savage it almost felt like pain. Heels. Back at the villa, Elena fell asleep nearly as soon as he laid her down. Only then, sitting on the edge of the bed, with blood drying on his knuckles and dawn gathering outside, did he let himself break. He cried silently, shoulders bowed, heels, because there are forms of relief that feel too close to collapse. He had not cried even when he buried Santoro's entire operation under retaliatory fire before sunrise. But grief and love use the same pathways in the body. When one is threatened, heals the other answers. Elena woke later to sunlight and found him beside her, one arm over his eyes like a man whose sleep had been fought for rather than given. She touched his jaw. He woke instantly. "How bad?" she asked. "You tell me. Concussion. Bruises. Heals. My ribs hate me." She studied him. "You killed him." He did not insult her with evasion. "Yes, and the others, most of them." She looked down at the blanket for a long moment. Heals. This was one of those real crossroads stories rarely let their women have honestly. The point where she might recoil not because violence is shocking in the abstract, but because now it had a face she loved attached to it. Heals. Elena surprised him less by what she chose than by how thoughtfully she chose it. "I'm not going to pretend I'm okay with violence as some kind of lifestyle accessory," she said slowly. "I'm not wired that way," Heels. "But I'm also not going to lie and say I wish you had let that man live so he could try again." She looked back up. "I'm glad I'm alive." Ronan's throat tightened. "You should leave me," he said. "Probably," she said. "But I'm not going to," he almost argued. Heels. She stopped him with a raised hand. "Don't give me a speech where you decide what is best for me without asking me. I was tied to a chair with a gun to my head, Ronan. I earned the right to make my own decision after that. Even bruised, even exhausted." Heels. There she was again, dignity before fear. Heels. Choice before possession. She asked for the truth then. Not every operational detail, not names and routes and percentages. She asked what being with him actually meant. He answered more honestly than ever before. It meant risk, surveillance. Heels. Men who would exploit anything they thought he loved. It meant he could not offer normality. No fully private vacations. No carelessness in public. Heels. No guarantee that the violence around his life would disappear simply because they wanted tenderness more than blood. "What can you promise?" she asked. He sat with that. In the end, he offered the only promises worth making. Heels. "I can promise not to lie to you about who I am anymore. I can promise to do everything in my power to protect you without taking your choices away from you. And I can promise that if you stay, Heels, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that." She listened. Then she said something he would remember years later. "You don't become worthy of love by being clean, Heels. You become worthy by being honest, accountable, and willing to grow." Matteo would have admired her. The thought nearly undid him. Over the next days, a new routine formed under pressure. Heels. Elena insisted on returning to work after a short recovery because, as she put it, trauma grows teeth if you feed it isolation. Ronan wanted her at the villa under constant guard. She refused being hidden like evidence. They compromised. Heels. 2 security professionals, Sophia and another former soldier named Marco, rotated close protection without shadowing her every breath. Elena learned quickly how much mental energy hypervigilance costs. Feels. She also learned she could choose not to let fear make her cruel. When kitchen staff at the restaurant fussed over her too much, she thanked them instead of snapping. Feels. When she noticed one dishwasher trembling around her because he had heard fragments of the kidnapping story and thought she must now see everyone as threatening, she spoke to him normally until his shoulders lowered. Feels. Trauma is not permission to stop seeing people as people, she told Ronan that night. If anything, it should make you more careful with them. That line changed him more than she realized. Feels. He had spent years in a system where utility overrode dignity. Men were assets, problems, variables. Even loyalty was often measured by use. Elena moved through that world, not blindly, but with a stubborn insistence that respect was not naive. Feels. It was necessary. She knew the drivers' wives' names. She asked the house staff what hours they preferred during security lockdowns instead of assuming. She told Luca to his face, Feels, that one of his younger men looked like he had not slept in days and should be sent home before exhaustion made him reckless. Luca, astonishingly, listened. Feels. She terrifies people in a completely different way than you do, he told Ronan afterward. Good, Ronan said. He meant it, because slowly the villa changed. Not in aesthetics, in atmosphere. Feels. Men still came with ledgers and coded phones and serious expressions, but they lowered their voices in hallways because Elena was studying upstairs. They wiped their shoes at the kitchen door because she had once stared at muddy footprints and said, Feels. If I survive kidnapping just to be taken down by mold spores, I'm going to be furious. Even Sophia laughed at that. Humanity began to infiltrate the edges of the empire in small, almost embarrassing ways. That does not redeem crime. Feels. Nothing so simple, but it does reveal something important about people. Environments become harsher when nobody insists on remembering the personhood of those inside them. Elena did. Ronan began to do it too, more explicitly. Feels. He asked questions of men he usually dismissed. Feels. Paid for the medical treatment of a porter injured at the docks without making the family beg. Ended one long-standing arrangement with a local intermediary after learning the man had been exploiting migrant workers because, Feels. As Elena had once said over breakfast while reading an article about labor abuse, power becomes evil the second it decides some people's suffering counts less. He never admitted aloud that her words had guided that decision. He did not need to. Feels. She saw the pattern anyway. You're changing things, she said one evening when he returned from the port unusually quiet. Maybe, he answered. Why? Because some of them needed changing. That's not the whole answer. He looked at her then. Feels. Because Matteo wanted me to leave this life, and I refused. I cannot undo that, but I can stop pretending every tradition I inherited deserves protection. Elena crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. That matters, she said into his chest. Feels. Not because it erases anything, because it means pain is not the last teacher you listen to. Not long after that, he told her about the restaurant Matteo had once dreamed they would open together. A small place on the coast. Honest food. No hidden rooms. Feels. No armed guards pretending not to be guards. Music at night. Elena listened with tears in her eyes and said, Then maybe one day we build part of that dream, even if it looks different now. It sounded impossible, and yet with her, Feels, impossible things had started making practical demands of reality. Feels. 2 months after the kidnapping, before sunrise, Ronan woke earlier than usual and watched Elena sleeping with one arm under the pillow and a book face down on the blanket, as if she had fallen asleep in the middle of a sentence. Feels. Morning light softened the bruises that were finally fading from her ribs. He thought about how close he had come to losing her, about how close he had already come years ago to becoming a man no future could reach. Feels. The decision formed with annoying simplicity. Marry me, he said, her eyes open halfway. What? Marry me. She pushed herself up on one elbow, hair everywhere, gaze full of disbelief and sleep. Are you proposing at 6 a.m. without coffee? Feels. Yes, that is an outrageous lack of planning for a man allegedly capable of controlling half of Sicily. He almost smiled. Is that a no? Feels. That is a try again when I'm fully conscious and preferably when you have a ring and an understanding of basic ceremony. So not a no. Feels. She poked his chest. Do not lawyer your way around the romance, Ronan. He kissed her until she laughed against his mouth. 3 days later, he took her to dinner at a cliffside restaurant where the sea below turned violet as the sun went down. Feels. He ordered dessert for the first time in her presence, which by itself made her suspicious. When the tiramisu arrived, there was a ring set into the center, simple and elegant, bright without being ostentatious. Better? He asked. She was already crying. Heels. Much better. This time when he asked, he did it properly. Told her she had crashed into his life and refused to let grief keep ownership of him. Told her she had seen the worst parts of him without reducing him to them. Heels. Told her she made him want to become a better man, not in fantasies, but in habit, in decisions, in the small repeated acts that build character. She said yes before he finished the last sentence. The engagement changed everything and nothing. Heels. Ronan was still who he was. Heels. The world still watched. Within a day, much of Palermo's underworld knew he was marrying the American waitress. Gifts arrived. Some tasteful, some vulgar, some clearly strategic. Heels. A few old allies visited to meet Elena as if assessing whether she was real or an expensive rumor. The reactions taught her quickly how tribal that world remained. Some men dismissed her as temporary. Some women, Heels, partners and daughters within those circles, watched with a caution that felt more protective than hostile. Luca, acting as translator when cultural nuance got slippery, kept a close eye on the entire procession. They're not only judging you, Heels, he told Elena afterward. They are judging what it means that Ronan is allowing himself this. That's a lot of pressure for one ex-waitress, she said. Luca's mouth tilted. You survived worse interviews. Still, Heels, the first months of engagement were not easy. Elena struggled with language and etiquette. She made mistakes. Heels addressed one older associate too casually and later discovered the man had taken offense because respect in his world ran on layers of ritual she could not yet see. Heels. Another time, she challenged a business conversation at dinner without realizing she had interrupted a structure where women, even powerful women, were expected to remain silent until the men finished positioning themselves. Heels. She apologized when appropriate, refused when not. More importantly, she learned. She asked questions. She listened to the women more than the men. She noticed that in many rooms, the women saw more than anyone gave them credit for. Heels. The wife of an Eastern operator taught her which silences were dangerous. Dante Russo's sister, a lawyer with eyes like sharpened glass, told her privately that being underestimated was not always a disadvantage. Heels. Men who think you are decorative usually tell the truth too near you, she said. Elena stored that away. Heels. Her growth mattered to Ronan, not because he needed her polished for his circles, but because he saw how seriously she took the responsibility of entering a difficult world without surrendering herself to it. She studied Italian with more discipline. Heels. Took notes on names, loyalties, grudges, marriages, old funerals, local history. I don't want to become one of those people who loves someone and then expects the whole world around him to translate itself for my comfort, she told him. Heels. If I'm staying, I should understand where I am. He loved her more in that moment than he could explain. Not because she made sacrifice into a spectacle, but because she respected context. Respect again. Always that. She kept insisting on it. Heels. For people. For culture. For service workers. For herself. Their wedding when it came was smaller than rumor expected. Not because Ronan lacked the means for spectacle, but because spectacle made him distrustful. Heels. They chose a chapel outside the city. Old stone, sea wind, limited guests, heavy security hidden under formal wear. Marco from the restaurant cried openly. Jeppy pretended not to. Heels. Luca stood at Ronan's side, looking as though he would personally shoot fate if fate attempted interruption. Elena wore ivory silk, no excessive train. Her hair pinned simply. Heels. And when she walked toward him, Ronan experienced the rarest sensation of his life. Peace without numbness. The vows were plain, honest. She promised not perfection but steadiness. He promised not safety, because that would have been a lie, Heels, but partnership, truth, and the effort of becoming a man whose power served more than appetite. After the ceremony, during the meal, Elena stood and made a short toast no one expected. She thanked the staff by name, the servers, the kitchen crew, Heels, the drivers waiting outside, the florist's assistant who had fixed a last-minute problem. Good days are held up by many invisible hands, she said. Heels. I don't want ours to be one of them. It was such a simple thing, and yet half the room looked startled because gratitude in those circles often traveled only upward, never outward. Heels. Ronan watched the younger waiters' faces change as they realized the bride was looking directly at them, not through them. That night, long after the last guest had gone and the security rotations had settled, Heels, Ronan told her that Matteo would have loved the toast. She cried quietly against his shoulder. I wish I'd known him, she whispered. You know him now, Ronan said, and in a way that was true. Heels. They were building a life where Matteo was not erased into tragedy. He became story, influence, memory, warning, tenderness. Elena asked for piano music in the villa because Matteo had loved it. Ronan, who had avoided the instrument for years, Heels had it tuned. Some evenings he sat in the next room while Elena studied and someone from the conservatory came to play. Heels. Not because he could bear nostalgia now, but because memory had stopped being only punishment. Marriage did not remove conflict. If anything, it sharpened some of it. Elena hated how often security altered ordinary life. Heels. Ronan still leaned toward control under stress. She still pushed back. Once, after he quietly ordered Sofia to discourage Elena from taking a solo walk through the market, Elena found out and was furious. Protection is not the same as permission, Heels, she said. I am not your hostage with better lighting, he apologized. Properly. No defensiveness. He also explained the threat assessment that had driven the decision. They worked out boundaries, routes she could take, Heels, conditions where she informed security but retained choice. It was unromantic. It was also exactly how real trust is built, negotiated, revised, rooted in mutual dignity instead of grand speeches. Over time, Heels. Ronan's organization changed further in ways outsiders might never have recognized, but insiders did. Heels. He tightened rules around labor exploitation, pushed out two men known for enjoying cruelty more than business required, ended a long practice of using teenage couriers in vulnerable neighborhoods because, as he told Luca in a rare unguarded moment, Heels. I lost one child to this life. I will not keep feeding others into it because it's efficient. Luca did not argue. He saw perhaps before Ronan did that love had not made his boss soft. It had made him morally restless. Heels. That is a different and far more disruptive thing. Nearly a year into the marriage, Elena found out she was pregnant. The test sat on the bathroom counter while she stared at it with both hands over her mouth. Joy hit first, then fear, Heels. Then a grief so sudden she had to sit because she understood at once what this would awaken in Ronan. When she told him, he went still in a way she had learned to read as overwhelm, not indifference. Heels. He crossed the room slowly, looked at the test as if it were a coded message he did not trust himself to interpret. Are you happy? He asked. She laughed and cried at the same time. Yes. Terrified, but yes. His own eyes filled. Heels. Then I'm happy. Later that night, after the first stunned tenderness passed, the fear came harder. He woke from a nightmare with his breathing ragged and the blankets twisted. Heels. Elena turned on the lamp and found him sitting on the edge of the bed like a man called back to an old battlefield. Talk to me, she said. I can't lose another child, he said, and it was the most naked truth he had spoken in months. Heels. She moved to sit in front of him. You are not reliving the past, you are entering something new. The world around me hasn't become safe. No, she said. But fear doesn't get to raise this baby. We do. It became a discipline after that. Heels. They prepared seriously. Security plans, yes, but also practical human things. Heels. Prenatal classes, medical checkups. A pediatrician chosen for skills, not loyalty. Conversations about what stories their child would grow up inside. Ronan spoke more often about leaving parts of the old business behind entirely. Not in fantasy now. Heels. In sequence. In strategy. Some investments had already been redirected. Legal fronts that were once covers began becoming actual businesses. Elena encouraged the shift without pretending morality be solved through paperwork. Heels. Legitimacy is not a costume, she reminded him. It has to show up in how people are treated. He knew. And because he knew, change moved slower than simple redemption tales would allow. But it moved. Heels. When their daughter Isabella was born after a long, difficult labor on a storm-heavy night, Ronan wept with his forehead against Elena's hand, while the infant cried, with astonishing fury at the world. Heels. Later, he held the baby with visible terror for the first 10 seconds until she settled against his chest and his face transformed. Not softened, deepened. Elena watched and understood that some men become fathers, and some men become fathers again. Heels. The second kind carry memory in every touch. Isabella brought joy, yes, but also the final reckoning with what kind of life Ronan wanted to leave behind her. He could no longer tolerate vague half measures. Heels. Over the next year, he withdrew from roots he once would have defended with blood. Promoted Luca into handling transitions with strict terms that cut off older predatory arrangements. Heels. Expanded legitimate holdings with actual labor protections written into contracts Elena insisted on reading herself. funded a scholarship at the conservatory in Matteo's name for students who could not afford lessons. Eels. Quietly paid the debts of 2 widows whose husbands had died in dock accidents no one in the old order would have counted. Eels. None of these actions erased what he had been, but people are not improved by pretending erasure is possible. They are improved by choosing responsibility over self-mythology. Elena understood that. She never called him redeemed. She called him accountable when he earned it and complacent when he slipped. He loved her for both. Eels. Years later, people would still tell the origin story badly. They would say the most feared man in Sicily fell because a waitress spilled wine on his table. They would say she tamed him. They would say love made him weak. Stories like symbols, eels. They simplify what they cannot comfortably hold. The truth was harder and more human. Ronan did not fall. He stopped living like a man already buried. Elena did not tame him, eels. She respected him enough to tell him the truth when fear and power distorted him. Love did not make him weak. It made him accountable to parts of himself he had abandoned because grief was easier to worship than hope. Their life remained imperfect, eels. How could it not? There were still threats sometimes. Old enemies rarely disappear into moral instruction, eels. There were still compromises to unwind, histories that would never become clean, nights when Elena checked locks twice and hated that she did, eels. Mornings when Ronan watched Isabella sleeping and had to step outside because love still terrified him by the scale of what could be lost, but there was also breakfast sunlight in the villa kitchen, eels. Isabella banging a spoon against a high chair and laughing at the sound. Elena reading Italian novels with a dictionary open beside her, then arguing with Ronan about translations, eels. Marco visiting with too much dessert from the restaurant and claiming he had not brought enough. Jep sending over experimental sauces in labeled jars. Luca, improbably, eels. Letting a toddler put a sticker on his jacket and leaving it there for an hour because removing it would have felt like cruelty. These things mattered. Not because they made for neat endings, eels, but because ordinary tenderness is the most radical thing in any world organized by fear, eels. One spring afternoon, Elena took Isabella to the market with Sophia following at a respectful distance. She bought tomatoes from the same vendor who had once seen the dark van before the kidnapping. He was older now, slower, eels. He waved at Isabella and slipped her a clementine from the crate. Elena thanked him and asked after his wife's hip surgery because she remembered details like that. On the walk back, Sophia asked, almost curiously, "How do you keep doing that, eels?" Doing what? Seeing people. Most who live around power eventually stop. Elena looked down at her daughter in the stroller. Because if I stop, then the dangerous parts of this world win even inside me, eels. That was the real center of her role in Ronan's life. Not innocence, not beauty, not some fantasy of the good woman reforming the bad man through devotion alone. She kept insisting that every person remained a person, and once a man truly accepts that, eels, many forms of cruelty become harder to justify, eels. Matteo had known a version of that truth. Elena brought it back to the house in daily language. Isabella, without knowing the history she was too young to understand, grew up surrounded by it. Respect the server. Learn the driver's name. Eels. Say thank you and mean it. Ask before assuming. Never let grief turn you arrogant. Never let fear make you contemptuous. If you have power, let it make you more careful, not less kind. These were not abstract lessons. They lived in gestures, eels. In household rules. In how Ronan corrected men who spoke carelessly about migrants, workers, women, anyone they saw as expendable. In how Elena insisted the scholarship fund publish criteria transparently because dignity includes fairness, eels. In how both of them taught Isabella to put her toys away herself because invisible labor is still labor. Their love story, if it had to be called one, was therefore not just about desire surviving danger, eels. It was about what happens when 2 wounded adults refuse to make a religion out of pain. Elena stopped running. Ronan stopped punishing himself by confusing emptiness with loyalty to the dead, eels. Together they built something that neither innocence nor power alone could have made. A household where memory and change were allowed to coexist, eels. A marriage where arguments about security and ethics and responsibility mattered because both people were fully present inside it, eels. A future where Matteo's absence was honored not by endless destruction, but by choices that reduced harm where they could. That is the closest real life gets to redemption. Not clean reversal, not magical transformation. Repetition, correction, eels, repair. One choice at a time. On the anniversary of Matteo's death, Ronan still went quiet. He still visited the cemetery early before anyone else arrived. But now Elena went with him, and sometimes Isabella when she was old enough to understand that families include those we miss as much as those we can touch. They would leave flowers. Elena would stand back when silence was needed. Later at home, Ronan might tell one new story about Matteo, something small. How he once declared all raisins a culinary crime. How he hated football but played anyway to impress a girl in school. How he dreamed of opening a restaurant by the sea where nobody wore a suit. Isabella would laugh and ask questions, and Matteo would become more than the explosion, more than the obituary, more than the wound around which Ronan had built a mausoleum of habit. He would become family again. Living stories do that. They return the dead to human scale. One night, years after the spilled wine and the cannery and the wedding and the birth and all the long work in between, Ronan and Elena sat on the terrace after Isabella had finally fallen asleep. The sea was dark glass below. Palermo glowed in the distance. Elena tucked her feet under herself and looked at him for a long moment. "What?" he asked. "I was thinking how weird this all is," she said. "That's your summary? You want the poetic version?" "I'm married to the woman who critiques my proposal timing." "Of course I do," she smiled. Then her expression turned softer. "I was thinking that when I moved here, I thought I was looking for a place to stop running." But really I think I was looking for a life where love and respect weren't conditional, where pain didn't have to be the end of the sentence. Ronan took her hand. And we built one, messily, imperfectly, but we did. He was quiet for a second. "You built it first," he said. "You walked into a room I had sealed and treated me like a person inside it, not a legend or a threat. You let me." Eventually, reluctantly, frequently against my better judgment, she laughed. "Your judgment was overrated at the time." "Maybe still is." He lifted her hand to his mouth and kissed her knuckles. Then, more serious, he said, "You taught me something Matteo had been trying to teach me before I was ready to hear it." "What's that?" He looked out toward the city that had shaped and scarred him. "That power without respect hollows a man out long before grief does." Elena squeezed his hand. "No dramatic music, no final gunfire, no easy absolution. Just that." A sentence earned across years of loss and choice. If the story had any value beyond the thrill of danger and the pull of romance, it lived there. In the idea that people can be changed not only by catastrophe, but by consistent humanity. That healing is not softness. It is courage repeated. That respecting others is not decoration for good character. It is the foundation of it, that we do not honor the dead by becoming less alive. We honor them by refusing to let pain turn us cruel. Ronan still visited Osteria de Luna on Thursdays sometimes. Not every week now. Life had expanded beyond ritual, but often enough that Marco kept the corner booth out of habit. Some evenings Ronan came alone and read for an hour. Some evenings Elena joined him after class, or after putting Isabella to bed with the nanny. On rarer evenings, the whole family came early, when the dining room was quieter, and Jeppy sent out small plates not on the menu, because he liked feeding the child who called him Chef Jeppy with solemn seriousness. Once, after watching Isabella attempt to eat ravioli with complete disregard for physics, Marco leaned against the table and shook his head. "You know," he said to Ronan, "the first night she spilled wine on you, I thought I was going to have a heart attack." "Reasonable," Ronan said. Elena snorted. Marco smiled at Isabella, then back at them. "Funny thing. I thought that was the disaster. Turns out it was the rescue." Ronan glanced at Elena, who was wiping sauce from their daughter's cheek with practiced tenderness. Rescue. Not from danger exactly. Danger had been real and remained possible, but from a smaller death. The kind that happens when a person decides they are finished with feeling because feeling once cost too much. He had mistaken numbness for strength. Elena had interrupted that lie. She had done it first with a spilled glass of red wine. Then with a gift. A question. A refusal to be treated as an object of protection rather than a partner in choice. A commitment to seeing every person in the room. A stubborn belief that even broken men can still be asked to become better. That was the real story. Not that the kingpin fell, that the man stood up. And because he did, because she stayed, because both of them kept choosing repair over performance, a life that might once have ended in endless retaliation widened into something painfully ordinary, and therefore priceless. A table, a family without prison, love without illusion, and the hard-won peace of becoming more human than fear wanted them to be.